Good morning. Welcome and thank you for coming to Eviction Filings, Unemployment and the Impact of COVID-19, a virtual town hall forum. My name is Mark Swartz and I'm the Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, or LCBH. Today, LCBH and Loyola University Center for Urban Research or Learning, or CURL, will unveil an update to our data portal, which includes eviction data from 2018 and 2019. We'll discuss the findings and address current concerns about the wave of eviction filings due to COVID that we expect to see in 2021. Later, we'll hear from two client speakers, and then we'll open up the forum for a Q&A. Before we begin, I'd like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank Loyola CURL for being our longtime university research partner. I'd also like to thank Wells Fargo National Housing Foundation, Square One Foundation, and of course, the City of Chicago Department of Housing, all of them for their investment in our eviction prevention program created to respond to COVID-related evictions and lockouts. Additionally, I'd like to highlight and give a special thanks to the Polk Brothers Foundation for being the very first funders of our data portal when it first launched in 2019, as well now as Wells Fargo for their interest in supporting the current work being done in the portal. I'm very excited to see the many foundations and organizations represented on our RSVP list. And I'm blown away by everybody I see that I recognize, but I can only call out a couple of you. But I'd like to recognize the City of Chicago Housing Department staff, Cindy Soto, and others that may be on that I don't see. Jeffrey Cubbage representing the 40th Ward, Senator Matty Hunter and Lindsay LaPointe from the Illinois House of Representatives. I'd also like to make a special shout out to PCC Community Wellness, who I see represented by a number of Zoom attendees this morning. For those of you who don't know, PCC Community Wellness is one of LCBH's medical legal partners in the Austin community. And if you ever get a chance to look at our eviction data portal community area by community area, you'll see that Austin in particular has been ravaged by eviction and has been for years and years. The MLP in Austin is a program where our two organizations partner to provide legal services for PCC patients who are facing serious housing issues that are also impacting the quality of their health. Finally, I am so pleased to see attendees from around the country. While eviction is a national issue, the eviction process can vary considerably across jurisdictions depending upon the background law, the costs associated with even getting into court, the quality of the agency records kept by the court, and a host of other things. So while it's important to understand the scope of our nation's eviction problem by tallying the number of eviction filings and eviction judgments, it is also essential that we examine individual jurisdictions and draw from local expertise in order to be able to affect court and legislative reform and determine how national policies should be enacted locally. And so I see the Chicago Eviction Data Portal as a model for what people can be doing in other jurisdictions if they're able to, if they have access to the data that we've been able to get access to. So in a minute, we'll begin the presentation. There will be time for questions today. We're going to try to leave 15 minutes. That's our hope. If you have them, you can enter them in the chat at any time, and we'll respond at the end of the presentation. And again, everybody has been muted for the duration of the event. If you unmute or accidentally unmute, please mute yourself because we're recording the event and appreciate your understanding. And at this time, I'd like to pass it over to Michelle Gilbert from Lawyers Committee for Better Housing to begin our brief introductions of everyone. They'll be introducing themselves, everyone that will be speaking today. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Michelle Gilbert, and I am the legal director and the director of the Chicago COVID-19 Eviction Prevention Project, for which, as Mark mentioned, we are grateful to the City of Chicago Department of Housing for allowing us to do this work. We're very intentionally about eviction prevention. We recognize the trauma associated with the displacement of eviction, and our goal is to prevent evictions from being filed. Our eviction prevention project has three legal components. We are very focused on negotiating with landlords so that evictions are not filed. We are representing tenants who are being illegally locked out, either negotiating for their return or in cases, some cases filing court cases. And then finally, we are representing tenants in eviction court where the eviction should not properly have been filed. From the outset, our project has been very committed to community legal engagement. We've done scores of trainings to community groups about the changing law and about how they can use the legal information that we give them to help prevent evictions in their community. And then finally, we're drawing from the data that you will hear about today, as well as our individual experiences with clients about policy initiatives at the local and state level that will assist our efforts in preventing evictions. A little bit later, I'm going to be talking with one of those clients whom we represent in courts, and also towards the end, talking about some of our policy initiatives. And now I'll introduce you to my colleague, Jude, our Supportive Services Director.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jude Gonzalez. I'm the Supportive Services Director at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, and I head up the Court-Based Emergency Rental Assistance Program, also known as CERA. This program provides Chicago-based renters with supportive services, free legal aid, and access to the state homelessness prevention funds, which could pay up to $5,000 of back rent owed. It could also pay for someone moving into a new apartment, and that would be security deposit, move-in fee, and first month's rent. In addition to financial assistance, we try to address the underlying issues that might have led to the eviction and provide folks with resources like financial literacy, referrals and resources related to job training, underemployment, unemployment, childcare, education, and other benefit eligibility for them. But like Michelle, I also play a role in the eviction prevention program, and we provide social services and supportive services in tandem with legal, with our legal team. You'll hear a little bit more from me later on as I will conduct one of the interviews with one of our client speakers. I'm going to turn it over then now to Randall Lurquin, our special projects person.
Hi, I'm Randall Lurquin. I am the lead on the Chicago Data Portal, and I will be talking about that shortly. So I'll hand it off to Grace Rock.
Hello, my name is Grace Rock, and I am the Data and Technology Specialist Vista at LCBH. And I'll hand it off to Peter Rosen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Rosenblatt. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Loyola University. And I've been working with the Center for Urban Research and Learning and LCBH on Chicago evictions for the past couple of years. And I'm excited to share some of this work here with you today. Then...
Okay, I'd like to quickly review the agenda. So we're first going to review our findings from our analysis of eviction court data from 2010 through 2017, but now updated to include years 2018 and 2019. So we'll have a full 10 years of Chicago eviction data. Then we'll briefly review some of the significant changes in the law since our last set of reports were released in May of 2019. We'll then introduce two new reports. The first report is a new eviction tracking system that shows eviction filings by ward and community area, updated on a weekly basis. The second report is the joint project from LCBH and Loyola Curl, looking at the relationship between eviction filings and unemployment in order to predict the number of eviction filings we might see in 2021. We'll then mention other factors that might play out to alter these predictions. We'll examine some of the racial disparities we see in Chicago. I'm mindful we're speaking to some people from outside the city, so Chicago is very known for not just its legacy of segregation, but it's profoundly and intractably segregated to this day, and that impacts what you see when you look through the eviction data portal and the differences by community area, some of the stark differences. We'll then introduce you, as Jude and Michelle mentioned, to a couple of renters who are LCBH clients who will put a face on what we've been discussing. And again, we plan to leave 15 minutes for Q&A.
So we launched the Chicago Evictions Data Portal in May of 2019 with data from 2010 through 2017. And today we are adding data for 2018 and 2019. So a quick update on some of our key findings. Chicago saw an average of more than 22,500 eviction filings per year, or just over 3.7 eviction filings per 100 rental units. Eviction filings have been in decline in recent years, and we'll be talking more about that later. And while the downward trend may be a positive sign, we're mindful that over the past decade, about 1 in 25 Chicago renters faced eviction each year. We continue to find troubling disparities in eviction filing rates when comparing Chicago's community areas by racial composition, and it's particularly troublesome in Black community areas. And again, we'll have more on that a little bit later. Eviction cases with claims for back rent remain at just over 80%, and this supports the common belief that most evictions are filed for non-payment of rent. In our initial findings, we found that 2/3 of eviction cases claimed less than $2,500. And at that time, that was the limit on emergency rental assistance. And as rents have steadily increased over the decade, that limit has recently been raised to $5,000. And we find that nearly 85% of eviction cases in 2018 and 2019 fell under that new threshold. There's a large disparity in legal representation between landlords and tenants, and it continues to increase. Landlords were represented increasingly from 76% to 87%, but tenants remained fairly constant. Overall, 81% of landlords had representation, where only 11% of tenants did. Overall, tenants reduced their likelihood of receiving an eviction order by about 25% when they had an attorney. With a private attorney, that likelihood was about 52%, and with a legal aid attorney, it was about 28%.
So I'll talk a little bit about what's happened since the first reports. And again, if you go to our eviction, if you go to our website, we have the eviction data portal, and we also have these updated reports that will explain with some more narrative what Randall just covered. Since the initial release of the eviction data portal, there have been some actual encouraging changes in the law and in administration at the court level, that locally here in Chicago and then in Illinois, that I want to review. And I think a lot of these changes could, would be very impactful in any jurisdiction. So the main change is Chicago's Fair Notice Ordinance, which was passed in July of 2020. So we're not going to see its impact until the moratorium is lifted, but it made 2 substantial amendments to the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. First, the ordinance increases the length of notice period for lease termination and rent increases. So previously in Illinois, landlords are only required to provide 30 days notice. And with the new ordinance, 60 days notice is now required for renters who've lived in the apartment for more than 6 months. And 120 days notice is required for renters who've lived in the apartment for more than 3 years. And all that's very significant to giving people time to move if they have to move. Second, the ordinance extends the amount of time a tenant has to stop an eviction by curing and paying the rent that they owe. Illinois law requires a landlord to serve a written demand. Typically, it's a 5-day notice before they can file an eviction. And after the expiration of that cure period, Chicago landlords were not previously required to accept rent and stop the eviction. So once you went past that 5 days, there was very little that we as advocates could do to help the tenant remain in the apartment unless the landlord was willing to take the rent and dismiss the case. Under the new ordinance, Chicago renters can stop the eviction by paying the amount owed plus court fees at any time prior to the actual issuance of the formal eviction order. So it's really significant. And we think it's going to provide advocates with more time to connect renters with emergency rental assistance. And if attorneys, because this is our model, we have attorneys in eviction courts, that will review the case to see if there are any defenses and to allow the tenant time to look into other resources that they can get to come current with the rent and be able to stop the eviction. So we think this is going to change the outcomes we see in courts and also disincentivize eviction filings where there's a likelihood that the renter will be able to come current. So this change may change what we're seeing when we look at eviction data in the future. Again, right now, no, because of the moratorium. The second legal change is Illinois Supreme Court Rule 139, which went into effect in August of 2020. So also we're not going to really know exactly how impactful it's going to be, but it's very impactful to us as both as legal aid advocates who are screening renters for to determine who we're going to provide with legal assistance, as well as data geeks who want to understand why evictions are being filed. So in Illinois, the state law, the Eviction Act, does not require the landlord include the notice or the 5-day notice or the relevant lease terms, even though they have to prove up the reason that there's an alleged breach and prove it up in court prior to getting an eviction order. But the law doesn't require that they provide these notices. And instead, the eviction complaint just states that the plaintiff is entitled to possession of the premises, the defendant unlawfully withholds possession, give me possession. Without knowing the specifics of the landlord's allegations or being able to look at the documents, legal aid attorneys are forced to make decisions to accept cases for representation without complete information. And oftentimes we only get these notices through the discovery process, and the allegations in the notice and even the facts about the method of notice of service were moving targets. Now the notices have to be part of the court record. Under this new rule, their plaintiff needs to attach notices, relevant lease terms to the complaint. So we'll be able to, when we look at the summons and complaint that the tenants received, we'll be able to look and determine exactly what's being alleged, what the tenant's being charged with. Additionally, these notices will allow researchers to determine the landlord's purported basis for filing each eviction case. This is interesting for us because right now the court data just distinguishes between single action and joint action. So whether there's a claim for rent or not a claim for rent. So whether it's just a claim for possession or possession of rent. We're interested in knowing things like how many cases are for cause evictions filed because the tenant is alleged to have breached the lease and how many of them are not for cause. So these notices are going to be really interesting and hopefully we'll be able to make our data much richer in the future by being able to look at these notices and code them and figure out why people are being evicted. Finally, the Chicago Housing and Health dashboard data from our eviction data portal has been incorporated into the new, I'm saying this wrong. Our eviction data portal data has been incorporated into the Chicago Housing and Health dashboard data. So this was created through Enterprise Community Partners and the Illinois Public Health Institute. And we think that adding eviction data to all this other information will be very useful. And again, our eviction data is actually pretty available to anyone who wants to use it. You'll be able to download it. If you check on our website, all of our eviction data is shareable, and we're happy to have it on this dashboard. Thank you.
Hello, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our new reports that we have out, the new eviction tracking reports. And this is us really delving into real-time data. These reports track eviction filings in Chicago through monthly and weekly reports. They are available through a ward or community area breakdown. You'll see on here, this is by community area, it's a weekly one. And these are meant to track filings while the moratorium is in place and after its expiration. And they will be updated on a weekly and a monthly basis, and they are available on our website.
All right. So I'm going to discuss what these data that Randall and Grace have been telling us about might tell us about the impact of COVID-19 on eviction filings. And this work comes out of a partnership between LCBH and Loyola Center for Urban Research and Learning, or CURL. And CURL emphasizes research partnerships that bring together community knowledge and academic knowledge in service of the broader community. And so we've been exploring different questions that these data can tell us. And today I'm going to focus on this relationship between eviction filings and unemployment and how it might shed some light on the impact of COVID-19. And then a little later, I'll talk more about racial disparities. So next slide, please. So to start, we can look at the monthly breakdown of eviction filings in Chicago going back over the past decade to January of 2010. And overall, this is close to 250,000 residential, that is non-commercial eviction filings. And there are three things to point out from this graph. One is the spikiness of it. There are seasonal fluctuations in eviction filings, fewer in the winter and significantly more in the fall and summer. Second thing is, as Randall had mentioned earlier, this general trend of decline from a peak around 2012 or so. We've seen a steady decline in the number of eviction filings. And one of the things we wanted to do in our partnership was explore what could be driving this. And we started looking at the relationship between eviction filings and unemployment. And unemployment has also been falling over the past decade. And there is, in fact, a statistically significant relationship between evictions and unemployment. We fit a regression model using a 1-month lag in unemployment, that is, using the unemployment rate of 1 month to try to associate that with the number of evictions filed in the next month, and also taking into account season and year. For those of you who are interested, our equation model is down on the lower left. And we did find, right, this significant relationship between unemployment 1 month and the number of evictions filed the next month, a significant and positive relationship. So as unemployment goes up, the number of evictions filed goes up. And this model is helpful when it comes to the third thing to point out on this graph, which is the fall off in eviction filings in 2020, right at the tail end of the graph here. And when the COVID shutdown began in March, the court initially issued a stay on pending cases. And then in April, Governor Pritzker issued a statewide moratorium on eviction filings, which has been renewed every month since. So while there's been a moratorium on eviction filings, tenants are still responsible for their rent. So this means that whenever the moratorium ends, renters may find themselves owing a significant amount of back rent over several months, potentially. And at this point, landlords may well file an eviction. So how many tenants will be in this position? Right. And this is the issue that has a lot of people worried, not just in Chicago, but all across the country. And this situation is compounded by the huge increase in unemployment that's followed the COVID-19 related shutdown in the spring. So tens of thousands of Chicagoans have lost their jobs. Millions of people across America lost their jobs. And so this question is we're looking at is, will there be this huge wave, this tsunami of eviction filings once the moratorium lifts? So can we go to the next slide, please? So we realized we could use our model of the relationship between unemployment and eviction filings to help us address this issue. So first, go to the next. Yeah, this is the number, the dark bars there are the number of actual evictions filed in Chicago over the past year. And you can see from the dark blue bars the fall off in the spring as the moratorium took place. But we also estimated the number of eviction filings that there might have been based on the monthly unemployment rate for 2020, for each month in 2020. So the light blue bars here show those estimates of how many evictions might have been filed each month if the moratorium wasn't in place. And for the last 2 months, I'll mention for November and December, when we did this report, we didn't have yet unemployment rate data, and this unemployment rate for Chicago. I didn't have unemployment rate data, so we did a sort of estimate based on some national data on what the what the unemployment rate might be. And then we also, the next slide or next click, yeah, we did some estimates of what the number of evictions might be in the last 2 months with sort of higher or lower unemployment rate, about 3% higher or lower. So if we total the light blue bars here, right, the evictions that we predict might have been filed based on the unemployment rate, we get a total of about 21,000 possible evictions that could be filed as soon as January when the latest moratorium ends. And this is a range, we've got about plus or minus 500 based on those alternate estimates of what the November and December unemployment rate would be. So this number, 21,000 eviction filings, right? Compare that, the monthly average prior to COVID was about 1,500. So it is a large and significant spike. And so a large and significant spike that we could see as soon as the moratorium ends at the end of December as well. But we also, what we want to think about and talk about a little here too is whether or not all 21,000 of these evictions might be filed in January. And there's some reasons to think that the number might be lower. So I'm going to start by talking about one thing, the unemployment insurance supplement, which sort of came as a result of the CARES Act. So the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, was passed by Congress in March. And among other things, it provides a supplement to unemployment insurance for COVID-19 related job loss. And this increased existing unemployment benefits by an additional $600 a week. So one thing we looked at over this past summer was the potential impact of the supplemental unemployment insurance on the number of evictions that we estimated could be filed. Right, so this graph shows two additional sets of estimates on that total number of evictions. The first is shown by the dark blue dashed line here, which we've marked minimum supplement. And this shows how the estimate of monthly eviction filings might decline if we assume that households in Illinois or households in Chicago who get the minimum unemployment insurance benefit in Illinois, plus the additional $600 a week, if we assume they would be able to avoid eviction. And we calculated that at this level of income, a household would be able to afford a rent of about $735. Actually, that calculation also came from the Turner Center at Berkeley and the Institute of Housing Studies at DePaul here in Chicago. So at this level of income, a household will be able to afford a rent of about $735. We looked at how many evictions had been filed for back rent of $735 or less and reduced our estimates by that amount. And then, so that's the top dark dashed line. The second dashed line, the red one, is for a maximum supplement, which shows the estimate of monthly eviction filings, how it might decline if we assume that households who get the maximum monthly Illinois unemployment insurance plus the weekly UI supplement would be able to avoid eviction. And here, a household would be able to afford a rent of about $1,500 a month, and we reduced the number of predicted evictions by the proportion of evictions normally filed in a month for back rent of $1,500 or less. And so that leads to the decline that's shown by the red dotted line. So these estimates give us a sort of rough upper and lower bound of how many eviction filings might have been forestalled by the unemployment insurance supplement provisions of the CARES Act. And the total number across these 5 months is about 680 fewer evictions filed for the minimum supplement estimate and about 3,300 for the maximum supplement estimate. So there are two things to point out here, right? One is that the CARES Act unemployment insurance supplement could potentially have made a significant dent in the number of evictions filed. So while it wasn't specifically designed as an eviction mitigation program, it shows the possibility of federal policy in possibly reducing the magnitude of eviction filings. Of course, these estimates end in July, and that's the second thing to point out here, right? Because the program, the UI supplement program at 600 has still not been renewed. Those individuals who have still not found employment by this time are likely to have again fallen behind on rent and could perhaps find themselves facing an eviction when the moratorium ends. So next, we're going to turn to some other factors that might mean we see fewer evictions filed when the moratoriums end.
So the first is just the uncertainty around the different moratoria. In Illinois, there's been a statewide ban on filing residential evictions, most since the spring, and that's now set to expire January 9th, and it again may be extended. Unlike previous executive orders that banned residential evictions outside of some exception for health and safety, where there were special allegations that the plaintiff had to make, the orders issued by the governor on November 13th and then also on December 11th that have extended Illinois' moratorium require tenants now who haven't fully paid rent to provide landlords with a written declaration, very similar to the CDC's requirements, swearing that they make less than $99,000. They fell behind on rent due to COVID, used best efforts to make partial rent payments and would become homeless. So, this is now closer to the CDC moratorium than it had been prior, when there wasn't a burden put on tenants to have to provide this declaration. The most recent extension of the moratorium does close a loophole by clarifying that the landlord may not commence a residential eviction action against a tenant who does not owe rent unless the tenant poses a direct threat to the health and safety of other tenants or severe risk to the property. And also it requires that the landlord provide the tenant with a copy of the blank declaration, I think at the same time, or maybe 5 days before filing something. I don't have that in front of me right now. So, but we really, have no way of knowing whether this is going to continue into the spring or whether things really will open up in 2021. So that's one of the big unknowns. Randall?
So Peter highlighted the CARES Act unemployment supplemental, but another aspect of the CARES Act was how the state and the city of Chicago and other communities across the state, of course, used CARES Act funding to support rental assistance programs. And in the state, we had 150 million. Chicago, we had 33 million. So that, of course, was going to help tens of thousands of families stay in their homes.
Some renters also have established payment plans with landlords to catch up on rent. There's also been a trend of renters paying with credit, which raises real concerns about renters going into debt to keep up with rent. And there's also been move outs where renters may avoid eviction filings by moving out from the residence.
Who's up next? Randall, do you want to take this one?
Mark, that's you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll just, so the question is about, whether or not, landlords are actually going to file, once courts open up again. The more barriers that are placed on the courthouse, the more incentive there's going to be to resolve cases without court. So from cash for keys offers that we saw, really that whole technique developed during the last housing crisis, the foreclosure crisis, to constructive or actual illegal evictions, such as turning off the utilities or removing the doors. A lot of this is unknown. Data from Milwaukee suggests that these informal evictions, that I'm talking about on the spectrum from cash for keys to removing the doors, occurs more than twice as often as formal evictions. So Peter?
Yeah. So I want to revisit a key finding that Randall had mentioned earlier, and that's the racial disparities in eviction filings, right? And so again, this map with the dashed outline being the boundaries of the city of Chicago, for those of you who are not local. The yellow dots on the map show the rate of evictions filed per rental housing unit. So we're sort of controlling here for the proportion of renters in a community area. We're not seeing more evictions filed just because there are more renters. And the larger circles here have higher filing rates. So we first looked at a map like this about 3 years ago, and we were expecting evictions to correlate with neighborhood poverty, i.e. that there'd be more evictions filed or higher rates of evictions filed in poor neighborhoods. And there is that correlation between neighborhood poverty and eviction. But when we first saw this map, it became clear that there was a story here about race, right? And this pattern of eviction rates, I think as someone mentioned earlier, this pattern of eviction rates more closely mirrors citywide patterns of racial segregation, particularly the connection between high rates of eviction and majority Black neighborhoods. So next slide, please. So this chart shows these things in sort of summary form, right? The rows are community areas, loosely neighborhoods, large neighborhoods in Chicago by the predominant racial group in those neighborhoods, and then the filing rates per number of evictions filed per rental housing unit in 2018 and 2019. And there's a couple things to point out. One, right, that the filing rate is about twice as high in majority Latinx neighborhoods than in majority white neighborhoods. We can see that sort of 2.6 compared to 1.3 in 2018. And then the rate is about 5 times higher in majority Black neighborhoods than in majority white neighborhoods. So one thing we're doing sort of separately is exploring this racial disparity in greater detail through different types of analyses. But today I'm going to focus on how this relates to the topic of COVID. So next slide, please, Grace. So right, we've heard during the pandemic about higher mortality rates in Black and Latinx communities compared to white ones. We've also seen higher rates of job loss among Latinx and Black households. These data come from the US Census, its Household Pulse Survey, which is now a biweekly national survey of how households in the United States are faring on a number of dimensions during the pandemic. And these data are drawn from the Pulse data for the Chicago metropolitan area. We can see on the left here that job loss since the spring, since March, has been higher among Hispanic, Latino households and Black households compared to white households. And then we can also look at some of the housing numbers from the Pulse survey. So on the right, we have the proportion of renters by race who report being currently behind on rent. And again, this is in the Chicago metro area. We can see that the proportions are higher for Hispanic, Latino, and Black renters compared to white renters in the Chicago area. And there's a number of other sort of pre-existing factors that Black and Latinx households were more likely to be cost-burdened renters in Chicago prior to the pandemic. So these numbers sort of add to that concern, right, that this expected or potential spike in eviction filings could be felt more heavily in Chicago's non-white, among Chicago's non-white renters and in Chicago's Black and Latinx communities. And yeah, I mean, these are just some numbers or some sources, right? The eviction data portal, the household pulse survey, and I believe Mark mentioned earlier the housing and health dashboards. You can explore these numbers on your own or in detail on your own if you're so interested. I think Randall, is this?
So I'm going to talk about this at-risk versus harm concept. Nationally, we're looking at 30 to 40 million renters who are at risk. In Illinois, depending on the estimate you want to look at, it's about 500,000. Peter had mentioned we're looking at about 20,000 eviction filings after the moratorium, which is a substantially lower number. And that gets into this idea of at-risk versus harm. In our report, we use an analogy. There are millions of Americans with heart disease or at risk for heart disease, but a substantially lower number actually show up in the emergency room with a heart attack. And our numbers are really that emergency room number, that heart attack number. How many filings are actually going to be made? Prior to COVID, there were thousands, millions of renters who have trouble paying rent each month, and all of those people don't show up in eviction court. They somehow scrape together the resources and make choices about how to get that rent paid. And it also, as Mark had mentioned, the data from Milwaukee suggesting that these informal evictions occurring twice as often as formal evictions. So if we're looking at 20,000 formal evictions, potentially 60,000 informal evictions. And these are numbers using this new method that we've developed with Curl. And while we think it's a really good model, and it's going to work really well in a non-COVID timeframe to help us look at what sort of resources would be needed to support ideas like a right to counsel. It still remains to be seen how it's going to play out in COVID. I think we're all expecting minimally that 20,000 evictions to happen, which is sort of this horrifying thing. And it could be substantially worse in how many people will be displaced through informal methods. So yeah, that's why our numbers are looking at just formal eviction filings and not the whole at-risk of eviction number.
Well, thank you all. Peter, I'd like to thank you and Loyola Curl for contributing, all of your knowledge on this predictive model and the report on the relationship between evictions and unemployment. Grace, I just want to thank you for all the work you've been doing on the data for us. You're a real credit to the VISTA program. I don't know how we would have made this so slick without you. Thank you. And then of course, Randall, who, as we kid around, sort of built this whole thing in his basement while working on some other things for LCBH. The data portal is really a labor of love. And I wish it was live so that you all could play around with it, but it's very interactive. And so I recommend people go to it, and, you can go by ward, community area, but more than that, you can click in, and you can even go by a census tract and really dig down and see a lot of things by census tract. Sometimes I'll have fun and play around with it and see, are there differences within a community area by where I think there's a good public transportation hub and things like that. So there's still stuff that you can do with it. It's pretty cool. And now we would like to introduce our program people. So again, Michelle Gilbert and Jude Gonzalez, and they're going to be introducing a couple of renters who hopefully can really put a face and give you some details about this problem in their own words. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning again. Ms. Wade, I want to make sure you can unmute yourself. And
Good morning.
good morning. I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Wade, who is one of our clients in an eviction that was filed in violation of the governor's moratorium. Ms. Wade, would you like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about how COVID has impacted your family?
Okay, my name is Graciela Wade. And how it impacted me and us is I am 65 years old and I live on fixed income. I live with my granddaughter and her friend, girlfriend, and they both used to work back in July. At that point, they didn't have any more jobs. Recently, they picked up odds and ends jobs to cover a little bit of what could be taken care of. But at the time, it was only me. It was being very difficult for me to keep up with the rent. And I spoke to the landlord about it. Now, I also had mentioned to the landlord that there was some repairs that needed to be done in the apartment. And she in turn turned around and told me that she preferred that I moved out instead of making those repairs. So she didn't want the rent from me after that. And I told her that I would give her the receipt so she could see that I made the repairs. So she put me in a pretty bad place at the time. And that was back in July. Now, normally I was the one taking care of the rent. I didn't have to worry about paying the light, the gas, and any food. But since my granddaughter and the girlfriend lost their job, now that responsibility fell on me. And it's been a struggle because I have not been able to catch up to the rent. And I even tried to make some kind of a deal with the landlord. And she says, no, you have to find a place. And unfortunately for me, I have some severe health issues too, where I cannot go up too many stairs without having to have, because I have severe asthma. And I also have, what do you call that? I have back problem and sciatica. So it's very difficult for me to get around up and down the stairs a lot. And here I just walk from the street up one step and into my apartment. And for me, it's the best thing. And I even told my landlord that. I said, I cannot find anything as best as this apartment is for me. I mean, I could pay you whatever rent I could pay you and try to give you a little extra to pay off what I owe you. She says, no, I'd rather have you move. So, you know, she puts me in a bad position. I've been trying to make it good, but she just wants me out and she refuses to repair anything in the apartment.
How did you feel when you received the court papers that you saw that your landlord had filed?
I was devastated. I was devastated because knowing that I'm the only one making payment on, I mean, I'm the only name on the, it's not even a lease. I'm the only name on the rent receipt. I don't even have a lease here. So, and she knows that. And she knows that I she knew that I was on a budget, and for her to just be out like that just devastates me. And to receive that letter, just, I broke down in tears. I don't know how else to explain it to you. I just broke down in tears. It's just, it's, and in a time like this, it's even worse.
And you've appeared in court on Zoom now, haven't you? By yourself. And
Yes.
how did that go?
Well, the first time I appeared in court, which was in November, it kind of surprised me a bit because the judge started talking to the opposing attorney, and the opposing attorney, well, the judge asked the opposing attorney if the apartment was a business. And right away, the attorney said no. And a storefront, that's what he said, a storefront. But I have storefront windows. I have storefront windows. So I even told the landlord that he needed to replace those windows. And the landlord said that he wasn't going to because that's the way he bought the house. So I just waited for the judge to talk to me. And he says, no, well, we're going to continue this case until December. Yeah, December. And then that's what happened. And then we came to December, and now it's being continued until January. So that's where I'm at now.
And how did you get to me? This is a little unusual route.
Right. I was referred to you by Julia Song. Julia Song had given me your phone number, and I was having a hard time trying to reach out for you via the phone number that I was given. And she right away said that she was gonna call you, and she did. And that's how she was able to get you to give me a call and tell me about my situation.
And
that's how.
Miss Song's a reporter, right?
Yeah, she's a reporter. Yes, she is.
Yeah, she called me and I said, yes, this is exactly the kind of case we can work on.
Yes,
and
she did.
Now we're working on it together.
Yes,
Good.
she's
So,
helped me quite a bit. She's brought me down to a level where I can breathe a little better. You know, it's a little something different because I've never been interviewed the way she's interviewed me. I've never done what I'm doing now before. I used to be a little bit nervous about talking, and it's something totally different. And I'm glad. I'm glad I'm speaking up because it's not right for people who are on a fixed income, or they got both parents who lose their job, and then they get put out on the streets because they don't have the money to pay the rent. It's not fair. It's not right.
So let me ask, there are a bunch of different people listening in on this call. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it that we just asked and you answered the call. So lots of different people listening in, people who make policy, people who work with the courts, with academia, other lawyers. Any last words that you want to share, things that you would want to tell the government? This is a chance.
Yeah, I never got to this point before, but I guess I'm gonna give it a try. I guess I know that there have been people out there that have ruined it for other people who have needed the help to get back on their feet. to, I guess, maybe to not overlook not to overlook what had happened with those people, but to help the ones, or somehow, what am I trying to say? Somehow investigate a little bit more for those people who are trying to get that extra help, because one never knows. Don't just knock them down right away. Look into the case, or just because I've been asking for help from the government, and I got knocked down right away. And I even tried getting Section 8, and I was told I didn't qualify, and that upset me pretty much. And I even got to a point where I gave up to even look for help. And I'm a person that if I'm told I can't get it, I won't look for it anymore. And I shouldn't be that way. And I think that people like me should just let go of their pride. And if you need to get that help, you need to get out there and look for that help and get that government to help you in every way possible. And if you can find somebody who can speak for you, that would even be better. I mean,
Well, Ms. Wade, you are doing a great job of speaking up for yourself. You may not have ever expected that you would be doing this, but you're doing a great job speaking up for a lot of folks who aren't on the call, who in this really extraordinary time in our lives do need help. And I'm glad that we are here for you. And we're going to get this case dismissed, and we're going to get it worked out.
thank you so much.
You. And now I'm gonna yeah, no, I wish I could. We're here and it's COVID and I can't give you a hug, but someday we'll all get a vaccine and I'll be able to do that.
Yes.
So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jude again, who is going to talk some about how rental assistance helps tenants in this situation.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Ms. Wade, very much for that very moving story. I'm wondering if Ms. Roberts, because I can't see the entire audience, but if Ms. Roberts is on with us. If she is, and she can unmute herself, I'd like to do a little bit of an interview so that she might share her story as well. If not, I'm more than willing to talk about our rental assistance program, how it came about and where it is now. If she joins us, absolutely, please break in. That would be the more interesting talk than hearing me talk about rental assistance. But I do want to explain a little bit about how it goes, how it came about, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. I know that I've seen in the chat a number of people asking questions that may not have yet been answered in the discussions. But the court-based emergency rental assistance that I head up is the social work department at LCBH, and that is a team of staff and graduate level interns. It is really fairly new. It was piloted a couple of years ago when we were lucky enough to have some support, additional support from DFSS, the City of Chicago, the Continuum of Care, and All Chicago. We were able to have access to the state homelessness prevention funds, and we created an infrastructure to link some of our cases to the state homelessness prevention money in order to resolve back rent that was owed. I think as Randall and Peter alluded to, a lot of the eviction filings, about 80% of them, are related to back rent owed and could be remedied prior to the pandemic with what was then the limit, which was $2,500. So we piloted this program and envisioned it being, and it was in the courthouse. So there were social workers there, and it served a couple of major pillars as part of our strategy. One was to alleviate and unburden the court system. It was also set up to provide a way in which to make those landlords whole again with the rental payment, but most importantly, to create housing stability for the renters who were in need. So those three facets sort of drive what we do. And what we do is screen people for eligibility for that program, and as well as some of the other things that I alluded to earlier, which would be underemployment, unemployment, childcare, other benefits that they may not have been privy to prior to reaching us. And so we have also created an infrastructure that allows us to really respond to the number of funding sources that we've been lucky enough to have access to. And that would be the IDA grants that took place in late summer, as well as the City of Chicago money, and the Cures Act, in addition to the state homelessness prevention. So we work in tandem with the legal team to be able to get referrals from them. We are also connected very much to the city. 311 sends us referrals, but by and large, this has grown organically. And so word of mouth, clients who, like Ms. Wade, are very willing to share the resources that they found to be helpful with other people that they know are in need. And so we've gotten a lot of people who call us saying, I heard from a neighbor, I heard from a friend that this sort of help exists. And so my team is fielding a lot of calls, as well as the referrals that come from our Rentervention website chatbot that can branch people into the different resources and programs that LCBH offers. So the whole point is to recognize that this is can be a debilitating issue, and it is a symptom of the cumulative distress that our communities face. And when we can help to stabilize housing, we are in fact impacting that household, that family, and we would suggest that community by not having them be forced into a move. So we're grateful to our supporting partners, and I want to let folks open it up for questions. Maybe Randall has the ongoing list of questions and can channel them to the right people. Randall?
Sure, I'll just go through questions that have been asked in the stream. Someone asked about the latest moratorium, and it was extended another 30 days on December 11th, and it goes through January 9th now, the statewide one. The CDC one does end at the end of the year, and that is apparently part of the ongoing negotiations at the federal level that may be extended as well. There was a question about, have you accounted for illegal lockouts during this period of declining eviction rates? And is there anyone keeping track of reported or known lockouts? Very little data is available. If somebody actually makes a police complaint, there would be a record of those. I know that MTO, the Metropolitan Tenant Organization, takes a lot of phone calls on illegal lockouts. But it's a big unknown area. As Mark noted, data from Milwaukee suggests that these informal evictions, including lockouts, happen twice as often. It's a big frontier for data that we just do not have here in Chicago. It's a big hole in what we need. Is there any data to suggest a relationship of eviction rates in communities of color and the kinds of landlords, CHA landlords, mom and pops, et cetera? And actually, I'm going to hand this off to Peter because he's been doing some work on this.
Yeah, that's a good question, that's not. It's something we're looking into. Yeah, we have started to explore that. There's a sort of certain amount of cleaning and sort of sorting through the data to really get a solid answer for that. So I'm afraid I don't really have any insight into that at the moment, but it's definitely something that would be worth exploring further. Yeah, so I'm afraid hopefully we could stay tuned, I guess.
Another question, how is your team pulling the weekly eviction filing data? The Cook County clerk's website lists all the cases filed by day. And so we go and pull that data each day. And so that's how we get it. And then for addresses, we use a third-party vendor to get that. So there's a little bit of a lag for when we can report, because we don't know which of those are necessarily in Chicago or which ward community area. There was just a clarification. If I understand the data correctly, many more tenants lose their home by informal legal self-help than legal evictions. So the problem is much greater than our numbers indicate. And I had responded, yes, absolutely. Our report is focusing on formal eviction filings, and it's a huge number and we're frightened of it, but there's going to be a much huger number of these informal evictions happening and many more people at risk who need support so they don't fall through the cracks.
Randall, if I could jump in, I do have a question, because I know that Michelle had indicated that after her review and work on the reports with all of us, that there were policy recommendations she wanted to run through that the reports might lead us to, and if she could speak to that.
Sure.
I think that the information from the data, as well as our experience with the clients that we've been interviewing over the last several months, leads us to several policy recommendations that we are hoping that the state will address when the General Assembly resumes in January. As you can see, there are many more unemployment cases than are normally filed. And we know from our own experience like Ms. Wade's with her granddaughter and granddaughter's girlfriend, that people who have been working are now unemployed. So we will see many more filings than we would have expected, and eviction filings against people who might not otherwise have ever ended up in eviction court if it hadn't been for COVID. And so I would say one of our most important recommendations is to increase sealing court records. The prior data shows how difficult it is for people to be able to access housing in the future if there's an eviction filing. And that's why we're working with a coalition of groups that support filing or sealing eviction files upon the filing of the case. And we think that that's especially important now. We also know, because of the increase, the supplemental unemployment that folks have gotten, the working jobs, even if you're unemployed, like trying to get temp jobs or working temporarily, that people continued to make payments even when there was an eviction moratorium. And so we recommend legislation that protects tenants who have made partial payments. There are some legislative decisions that need to be made on exactly what that language looks like. But we especially remember that the CDC moratorium and now the Illinois moratorium require tenants to attest that they have made partial payments where they can. And we don't want a situation where people who have committed to that in a declaration, knowing that that's what they need to do for protection, than to just end up being evicted immediately when the moratorium ends. Of course, part of that partial payment has been rental assistance. We want to recognize the good work that the funders have done, especially the state, IDA creating a program, and people like Jude's team that have been getting rental assistance out, and tenants who worked with that system um, should get the protection of having gotten that additional money that went into the rental assistance goes directly to landlords. It does not go to tenants. And having secured that money should protect the tenants as well. And then my final policy point, and this ties to a question that Representative LaPointe has asked and Morgan typed in the chat about best practices for rental assistance programs. One point that we would like to make is that with rental assistance programs, landlords should be required to participate. I can't imagine that there aren't landlords now who regret not participating. And that when tenants have done the paperwork, tried to access money, and the landlord refuses to take it, then I think that there should be some consequence and some protection for the tenant. And if you haven't seen, there's an excellent article on this that was in yesterday's New York Times about a Pennsylvania rental assistance program. I would say as to other sort of programs, I have heard a lot, especially from immigrant communities, about where landlords need to provide a taxpayer ID that for landlords who don't have legal status, that causes some problem. So certainly one best practice would be to just make applying for these funds as simple as possible, with as little paperwork as possible, especially in a time of an emergency like this. And then I'm going to actually see if Jude has some more answers to that as well. As somebody who has been living emergency rental assistance applications, for the last 6 months, other recommendations for improving rental assistance programs?
Yeah, the only thing, I think those are great answers, Michelle. The only thing that I would add to that is a requirement for follow-up, so that we as an agency are held accountable, but so is the funding. They expect that we should be seeing housing stability, right? And that they aren't just putting money to save them for 30 days or whatever. But as you said, landlords might be leveraged to provide tenants with housing stability for a longer time, and we can follow up and report on someone being stably housed for 6 months, or ideally a year, a new lease, provided that they want to stay there. That would be the other thing I would say. If we could have some standardization around eligibility, it would be good, because I said we have administered IDA money, City of Chicago, Cures, and State Homelessness Prevention, and they all have something a little bit different. I don't know that we're going to change that, but something that would be standardized would be great. That's it.
I see there's a data question, so I'm going to hand that back to Randall.
Will the slides be made available? Yes, we'll post the slides. Absolutely. The reports are already posted online. Is there data available for suburban Cook County, and then a number of +1s on suburban data? And not that we know of, and I know a question came up about statewide data as well. The best source right now would be the Eviction Lab data that only goes through 2016. What we need are resources. If you have any ability to control what the courts can produce in terms of data to make it easier to access this data, it takes us countless hours to get this data for Chicago. And if we had more resources, we could spend countless more hours on suburban data. But I think one of the barriers is just how inaccessible this data actually is.
If I could jump in on that, just to, yeah, Eviction Lab is a great site and does have the statewide. It does, however, we can only speak to what it looks like compared to our Chicago data. And while the filing rate is the same as ours, the judgment rate seems to, I don't know if this has been updated, maybe Randall it has, but when the last time I looked at it, the judgment rate was about 20% less than ours, which makes Chicago at any rate look like it's a little better off than I think it really is. So I would be mindful of using the judgment rate across the state. I just don't know. And another thing I will say is that we are keeping, because of the way we're collecting the court data, we have all of the county data, which means we do have the suburban data. As Randall pointed out, we just don't have the resources. So, that's really, we have been reaching out to people as we've been working on the portal over the years about what do you want next? What's the variable you'd like us to look at? And we do hear this as being one of the big ones, but it's a big lift. So, we're still looking to resource that.
Is there an executive summary of the reports? There's actually two. One is just on the release of the 2018 and 2019 and just sort of an update to those key findings. And then the second report is the filings, unemployment, and impact of COVID. And both of those are on the eviction data portal. If you click the read the reports link, you'll see them highlighted there. And then as well, the new eviction tracking reports, which are sort of the real time. There's about a week or so lag, but real time as we think is possible. There's an interesting question here. How effective have mediation or court diversion programs been in reducing evictions? I don't know, Michelle, maybe?
Well, I mean, I might
Mark,
say
maybe?
there's a Shriver study. There have been a couple of studies now reviewing the different assistance that people are getting in California around low-income people and getting some level of representation. And they look a lot at mediation as one component along with legal aid. And what they tend to find is that there's definitely more positive outcomes. There's something, I don't know how they operationalize it exactly, but there's more housing stability for people that go through these programs. It's our contention that mediation would be very good in Chicago and in the Cook County context. And in fact, it is being looked at as part of the Chicago Bar Foundation's initiative to do all this work in the city and the county. It's called the Early Resolution Project. But it's our contention that we really need to evaluate the case both legally and for whether or not renters qualify for the rental assistance before going into the mediation, because without those tools, I don't see the mediation being as effective. And I do, this is my hope, is I think that when you look at the stuff going on in California with the Shriver report, and they talk about housing stability, it seems like most of the people still have to move. And it's my hope that if we're able to utilize both of these approaches of legal aid to make sure that the renter has their case evaluated and enough time and attention is given to it so that they can also look to see whether there are resources available for rental assistance, that we might have more people stay if we compare both rental assistance and legal aid and then the mediation. But I think you need all three. And I don't know, I think that if we rush to mediation without the other two, it's not going to be as effective. But we have a great mediation program out here. I gave a shout out to Casey Lively, who's with CCR, and I know she's on it. And they will take calls for mediation. They also do it pre-eviction filing, so definitely call them. But if rental assistance is on the table, I think the mediations will go a lot farther.
Hey, this is Chris O'Hara. I had to call in because the Zoom was just too full. I'm on Legal Aid Chicago board, and I had a question I didn't hear, get asked. And it's curious. You have landlords that are doing what they call pre-eviction, where they're sending things out. It's happening in Oak Park, and I believe Pangea's done guilty of this. What do you recommend to people that are trying to serve the people that are getting these notices?
Michelle, Mark?
Well, there is no legal prohibition right now from Pangea serving the notices. I would recommend that tenants who are getting notices contact rental assistance programs. I will say that there was a lot of media to the tenant who was making an income but not paying rent. This kind of, and I'm not saying it never ever existed, that this person doesn't exist, but it's kind of the straw person that the real estate industry raises to get concessions in eviction moratoria. And I heard them say that they were surprised that the tenants are not willing to, don't come out and negotiate with the landlords. And I'm not surprised by that. I grew up in a very modest income home. There were definitely times when I knew what day of the month a certain bill came in. I knew, my mom would snatch that bill and it would go in the back of a drawer somewhere if she knew that she couldn't pay that bill that month. I completely understand when clients call and tell me that they don't have their 5-day notice. When they got it, they threw it away right away. And I mention these things when I'm doing community legal education because I want people to know that we'll talk to clients in that situation too. You don't have to wait until you're sued. That's the value of conciliation, hopefully the value of early resolution. You don't have to wait until you have court papers to call us. But maybe that 5-day notice is the impetus, maybe it's the thing that says, okay, now I'm getting a 5-day notice, I better call legal aid. Or maybe you don't feel yet that you're ready to call, but you can go to Rentervention. Anyone can go to rentervention.com, ask questions about the 5-day notice, can develop a landlord's, Pangea, and they have attorneys. They probably are doing it right. Any landlord who's delivering a 5-day notice needs to deliver a blank copy of the governor's declaration beforehand under both the November and December executive orders. That declaration is written in pretty legalistic language, and I'm very happy to see that IDA has added a plain language explanation. And hopefully landlords are serving that plain language explanation sheet as well. But like I said, they can go to Rentervention with a chat bot if they have questions about the declaration, about the notice, and that will eventually get them, into either virtual clinic or get to talk to one of the eviction prevention attorneys. We can help them prepare a declaration if that's what's appropriate, and hopefully help them process rental assistance as well.
Well, we're at the 11:29, so we should probably end on time. Is there any really great question that we can go out on, Randall, or should we call it done?
No, I think you could call it done.
All right. Thank you all so very, very much for participating, and especially thank you, Ms. Wade, for sharing your story. The quantitative data is great. The qualitative data is really essential. And I know we put you on the spot, and I think that you were really eloquent in all of your responses. And thank you for partnering with us on this and for agreeing to come public.
Thank you so
goodbye,
much.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.